You've been following the hearings quite lengthy for us, but talk to us, what is expected to happen and what is likely to come out of Justice Moseneke's report?
Well, Palisa, at 9:30 this morning, the retired Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke will release that final report into the life Esidimeni arbitration hearings. You'd recall last time what was put on the table by Section 27 Solidarity as well as the state was that there was an offer of 200,000 rand for each family for emotional shock and funeral expenses. That was put on the table. And we also saw Section 27 also push for an additional 1.5 million rand for constitutional damages. That in particular because Section 27 had indicated that these families and the deceased themselves had gone through absolute shock when they were transferred from Life Esidimeni to the various unlicensed NGOs. You'd recall during these hearings how we heard that some of them were transported at the back of bakkies and even tied at the back of that transportation in order to take them to these illegal NGOs. So there are quite a number of things that the retired Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke would have taken into account before reaching his final report is the manner in which these patients were treated. We heard during these hearings that some of them died of hunger and dehydration, how some of them, the families of did not know where their loved ones were for some of them even over a year. So we also saw during these hearings as well how the arbitrator himself became teary-eyed, listening to quite a number of the testimonies that were quite shocking and certainly have been referred to one of the greatest tragedies in the healthcare system in South Africa post-democracy. So I think one of the great challenges that the arbitrator had to do here is to see how he was going to put a cost on the value of life, how much exactly would be enough to appease these families who've gone through so much trauma. So we don't know at this stage exactly how much that is going to be. While those figures were put on the table, the retired Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke, of course, would have the final say, and that's what he will be revealing here today. But many of the families, Palisa, are saying that while, yes, money would be compensation for the grief and pain and funeral expenses that they may have incurred, but at the end of the day, what they would want to see is that those who they believe should be held to account for this tragedy, they say, including the former health MEC Qedani Mahlangu, the mental health director Dr. Makabo Manamela, as well as the former HOD Dr. Bani Selabano, they believe should be facing extensive criminal charges. And they're saying they believe that at the end of the day, once that only happens, they would reach some kind of closure. Also recall that at this time, Palisa, is that there's still many families who do not know where their loved ones are at this stage. There are still many families who are yet to find closure about where their loved ones were transferred to. So this story indeed is really far from over until every single family that had their family members at the Life Esidimeni facilities does find their loved ones. So I think today just a section in terms of the closure of these families, I guess, in the revelation of that compensation, which will be given to them, is what they will get. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they say they want justice to be served. And I think, in particular, if we look at a time when this report is being released, we're in Human Rights Month. So justice will certainly need to be seen to be done in this instance, and that the human rights violations that were meted out against hundreds of these patients is something certainly that would need to send a clear message about the manner in which public servants do conduct themselves in this country. So I think quite an embarrassment, for the healthcare system here in Gauteng. And we saw previously when the Gauteng Premier David Makura had testified, he really did apologize to these family members and promised that something like this would never happen again. But I think, many of these families are also saying, Palisa, is that while there may be some revelation today in terms of compensation, how much money they will get, at the end of the day, they do not believe that those who took the stand told the truth. They believe that the only truth that was told here was by the families who had told of their suffering and their pain as well, because you would recall that the initial excuse that the Gauteng Health Department had given pertaining to why these patients were moved in the first place, the major issue that was identified was an issue of cost cutting. So when the Gauteng Finance MEC, Barbara Creasy, took the stand, she really tore that argument apart, saying that there was always money to look after these patients, and that in fact the budget for the Gauteng Health and in terms of mental health patients had increased from time to time. So closure to a certain degree for these family members in terms of getting some of the money back that they paid for the funeral costs and perhaps some of the emotional trauma, some compensation for that. But at the end of the day, what they would like to see is someone really face some kind of criminal action for what has happened in this tragedy.
All right, thank you so much there to our reporter, Griselda Lewis, live from Parktown. Do stay tuned to Channel 404, of course, for the latest regarding that particular report that will be unveiled by Justice Moseneke. As Griselda said, everything's expected to start at 9:30 this morning.